Hello and welcome. Happy Thursday to all of you that are joining us on this live, and also welcome to those who are watching this as a replay. I am Susan Berishaj. For those who are new to this channel or our channels, I am the founder of C Admissions, and every week on Thursdays, I host a live event covering a different topic related to the MBA application journey. Today, I'm excited to talk about Booth. Although Booth, as of today, has not released the essay questions and the deadlines for the new cycle, I think we can still talk about it productively and effectively in terms of supporting your application journey. And then once those questions are released, especially if there have been changes, we can have another session in the future to discuss those as well. So a little bit of logistics. I'm literally here live with you, and I'm happy to answer questions that you may have. I encourage you to use your comment section of whichever platform you're joining us from. I'll get to answer those questions during this live session. Of course, if you are watching it as a replay, you can write your comments and we'll get to respond to your questions as well in a comment form. We won't show your name on the screen, so don't worry, it's not going to be a permanent record of the question, but I'll read out the question and be able to and respond to it in the live. A few logistics. So we have quite a bit of exciting events happening in the coming weeks. So on Tuesday, I will be interviewing a Wharton recent grad. So they graduated, Priya graduated in this spring. And she is going to be with me that day on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time to talk about her experience, her journey in terms of pre-MBA and her journey during her time at Wharton, and then what is she doing now. If you are particularly considering Wharton, I strongly encourage you to attend that session, register. It's a live discussion. On Thursday, next week Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Columbia Business School. So luckily they have already released questions and deadlines, so we'll be able to cover the latest from Columbia Business School on the 20th. So if you're considering Columbia, definitely register for that event. The week after that, I'm going to be covering Wharton. So our event page on siaadmissions.com has a lot of the future events that we'll be hosting. I encourage you to go there and register for all the things that are of interest to you. We're constantly updating them. So obviously continue to check the page as well. And then finally, we've also released a quiz, so profile evaluation quiz. Where do you stack up for a top 20 business school? So how competitive are you? And that quiz has two parts. The first part is you respond to some questions and you get a score initially that tells you kind of where you stack up. And then from there, you'll also get a written report from me where I have an opportunity to look at your resume if you choose to share and be able to give you a little bit more color on a written form in relation to your background. And if you want to have a consultation, then from there, we can definitely have a conversation one-on-one for 30 minutes to talk about your profile, to talk about the schools you're applying to, and ways that we can support you on this journey. Excellent. So with that, why don't we get started for today's topic? So we're going to be covering Booth, and I have, as usual, a few slides put together that can essentially anchor the conversation, and then we'll go from there. Beautiful. So I will be covering, the profile, where our students in terms of the ones that are admitted, how do they stack up, their evaluation criteria, what are they looking for, their application components. This is up until the submission, so I'm not covering interview. I think it's a little bit too early at the moment to discuss that, and we'll have more sessions on the interview preparation in the future. And then Q&A. I want to leave some room at the end for some questions and answers. Obviously, I'll stop if you have questions along the way. Awesome. So Booth has about a 15% admission rate, still very competitive to get in. A class is not too large, not too small. It's about 637 students that attend, or a class that attends Booth's MBA, full-time MBA program. Their average GPA is 3.6. So individuals that have strong academic performance, which kind of makes sense. Booth is part of University of Chicago, and the school is a research institution, so academic strength makes sense there. Their GMAT average is 728 in the classic edition of the GMAT, and then the GRE is 162 verbal, 163 quant. Those are the averages. These are the numbers that you want to compare yourself in terms of the metrics. It's not the deal breaker, right? This is just the averages. Obviously, there's always a range in terms of who gets in. Important to remember that if one area is weak, another area needs to be stronger to compensate and be able to demonstrate that you will be a successful MBA candidate at Booth. So deadlines have not yet been released. However, if we look historically, the first round is going to be around late September. I believe last year was around the 21st of September. Anticipate something similar. Round 2 is the first week of January. I think last year was January 4th. Round 3 is the first week of April. I think it was also 4th of April. And then the consortium, so if you're applying to Booth as a consortium applicant, those dates we know. That is October 15th and January 5th for round 1 and round 2 of the consortium application process. So stay tuned. Information on deadlines is definitely will be released this month, so that you have ample time to put together applications and submit, of course, for round 1. What are their evaluation criteria? As I mentioned, Booth is a member of the University of Chicago, as well as a school within the University of Chicago umbrella, and academia research is really important. I think that's also evident in the fact that Booth has one of the greatest number of Nobel laureates on staff, and research is just part of their ethos. So when they have the first item on their evaluation criteria as the curriculum, I think it's an indicative that ability, academic strength is going to be an important component in their evaluation criteria. They're also looking, however, for someone who is not just, book smart in terms of like you can understand material and you can take tests. They're really looking for someone who is curious to learn and has a desire to want to be in a challenging and mentally stimulating environment. And that's what you will find at Booth. You do have to demonstrate this through your application, as every school is looking at your past as evident to support the future, to determine if you're going to be a success there. So make sure that you're capturing your curiosity throughout your resume, in your letters of recommendation, in the essays themselves, even though they may not necessarily ask you to show us how you're curious, you can weave those components into the application. The next thing is community. A very interesting factoid is that Every single applicant that I've worked with since I started CA admissions, who has had booth managers, there's been a consistent comment, and that is, booth managers are really interested in getting to know your goals and are extremely supportive of you getting there. That means that you need to demonstrate those characteristics, that you care about other people's success as much as you care about your own success. So you're supporting others and helping them be the best versions of themselves. You do need to communicate this through your essays, through your resume, again, through all components of the application. This is a more qualitative presentation of your candidacy. And then finally, they're looking at your career. This means like your track record. What kind of success have you had? What kind of impact have you had? Are you someone who cares about the community at large in terms of being a member that is going to be adding value? Because, as I said earlier, this serves as evidence that you would be able, well, one, you are marketable, but two, you will be doing this in the future, right? So I typically say this in our live session, especially if you are here for the first time. You want to screenshot this slide, and when you're working on your booth application, keep these components in mind to make sure that you are really you have top of mind what their criteria are, and then looking for ways that you can demonstrate that in your application. You do, of course, recognize that your application is your marketing toolkit to the admission team. So make sure that you're capturing how you align with their value system in your applications. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So obviously the next component is, well, that's all great. All of them have very similar components, or, that's great that they have those pieces. So how do I do this? How do I approach this character? How do I demonstrate these characteristics to the in the application? And I will say this, reflection, of course, nothing beats reflection. If you think about your experiences that you have, you do want to capture what those experiences have been, and then, of course, look at how you can communicate those experiences. Every story has many different lenses through which you can share it. So you have to reflect on what are those lenses that you can share your story. If you think about Booth has this art installation in one of their buildings that says, why are you here, not somewhere else? And that's a question that actually it's very important to the admission team as well. So when you think about, when you're doing your reflection, also do your reflection in terms of, why is it that you're choosing Booth over any other school? Not that you have to choose Booth over any other school at this stage. It's that you have to be able to communicate to Booth, why is it that you're choosing it, right? Why is it that you want to attend this institution? Obviously, because you're applying to the program. So keep that question in mind as you're drafting your application. I see a comment. Oh, you guys are very welcome. Thank you for that lovely comment. Okay, so what are the application components? Where do you get to share this information? Well, of course, your academic prowess. How did you perform in undergraduate, or if you've done graduate studies, you get to share that in your transcript. You also get to share your test scores. Obviously, you do want to show strength, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have 4.0 GPA. It doesn't need to be that you have to have a minimum of 3.6 GPA to be admitted. It means that you have to demonstrate that you are someone who is academically capable. And sometimes this happens that in college, you were first time out of the house and you wanted to explore, you wanted to have fun, you wanted to meet friends and be part of all sorts of activities. That is normal. However, that doesn't mean that you leave the score as is, meaning you should make sure that if your undergraduate GPA is below the average of the school, or not a really strong score, you absolutely want to have a stronger test score so that you are able to demonstrate that you are no longer that kid who was in college and immature. Sorry to say that, but I think it's normal also. And if that's not enough, then you can also look at taking classes like Harvard Business School's core class, or I always mention these two because they're always top of mind, but Berkeley Extension School's Math for Management. Like, these are all different ways that you can demonstrate aptitude. Now, remembering that this is a research institution, they care a lot about academics. So you want to make sure that whatever classes, supplementary classes you're enrolled in or certificate bearing, and that they're challenging. So if you do a Coursera class that is not going to be like anyone who is going through the process can complete it, well, it's not going to hold that much weight. So you do want to make sure that what you're being selective in what you are enrolling in as well. Okay, so there's a question here. What if you have high GPA but low GMAT? Would the reverse be the same? No, unfortunately, no. I mean, your GPA can help in terms of demonstrating that you are someone who perhaps are not as good at test taker as you would like to, or as you're capable of if you're put in a classroom. So yeah, those can be explained, but the GMAT is still something that tells them who you are currently, right, as an applicant. So you want to retake the GMAT if you can. And also I will say, I always advise this to applicants, and I know you've already, it sounds like you've already completed the test and already have a test. I mean, you completed the preparatory work and already have a test. But I always say, look for the test that it's more natural to you, more easier for you. That's either the GMAT or the GRE. It doesn't matter. Schools are agnostic to which of the tests you submit. So go with the one that helps you show the best score, show the best presentation of yourself. So if you're not really strong in GMAT, consider the GRE and see if that one is easier for you to get to a competitive score. And you have on the previous slide those numbers of what the averages look like for both. We have, of course, the personal information. This is in the application portal, which is where you submit your application, right? So you have, the portal has many different questions, many short answer questions that you want to make sure you give yourself time to actually complete. I know no one that's going through this process is thinking about that initially, but I want to bring this to your attention because it's something you need to allocate time for. There are short answer questions that are sometimes lengthy, sometimes don't have a word count limitation, which means that you have ample space to really elaborate, and it's expected of you to elaborate. So make sure that you give yourself time for that. And that's where you also include your personal information, activities that you've been involved in college, post-college, awards that you have received in college, post-college, and all sorts of different questions along the way. Then you have your professional experiences. So this is where I know you have in your resume your professional experiences, at least some of them, more recent ones. You have to repeat them in the application portal, but don't do a copy paste of what you have on your resume, or write C resume, which is one of mine, although I'm not reading your final product, but I know that it's also a pet peeve of the admission team. So don't do a C resume, because from their perspective, it's like you're being lazy and you're not really taking the time to capture who you are. So, don't do that. And then you also have a place where you can include a resume. A resume is a one-pager unless you have more than 10 years of work experience. That's the industry standard. So sometimes it happens where applicants have many achievements that they want to share. This means that you have to be selective in what goes in the resume and what goes in the portal. So in the portal, you can have a more robust list of all the activities that you've done, but the resume must be a one-pager, right? And just make sure that this is a bragging opportunity for you, meaning showcase your greatest accomplishments, your best qualities. It's what goes on the resume. They also ask for 2 letters of recommendation, as well as 2 required essay questions, 3 required questions if you're a reapplicant, and a 4th is an optional for both first-time applicants and reapplicants. So we're going to cover the letters of recommendation and essays in terms of what to do from here. So letters of recommendation, as I mentioned, there are 2 required, and they follow the GMAT common letter recommendation format, which has 2 main questions, and those are: how does the character compare to other well-qualified individuals in a similar role? Essentially, it's where you capture, like, what is your greatest strength? And then the second question is, how does the candidate, give me a time when you gave the candidate constructive feedback. What was their response, and what was the outcome? This is where your recommender choice really matters in terms of, choosing someone not based on their job title or their pedigree or the institution that they attended, rather choosing someone who can give detailed responses to these questions, because that's what makes for a strong letter of recommendation. So if you haven't selected your recommenders yet, you need to get on it, because time is of the essence, especially if you're applying to round 1. And make sure that you're selecting the individuals who can give the most details in their responses, because for both questions, they need examples. And they need to be able to go in details in the examples. And these examples should be something they have witnessed firsthand. Okay, so that covers the letters of recommendation, macro level, of course. And then there are 2 essay questions. The first one is, how will a Booth MBA help you achieve your immediate and long-term post-MBA career goals? And the second one, an MBA is as much about personal growth as it is about professional development. In addition to sharing your experiences and goals in terms of career, we'd like to learn more about you outside of the office. Use this opportunity to tell us something about who you are. These are the 2 questions that are required of candidates that are applying to Booth. And the important thing that sometimes applicants confuse is because it's not natural, actually, because every single school gives you a word count limit in terms of, like, no more than this. Booth says no less than, right? Meaning you have no cap in terms of how much you're going to say, but you have a minimum. And the minimum is 250 words to respond to the question. I typically, when I work with applicants that are applying to Booth, the first question we can respond to in about 600 words, the second question in about 500 words. I see there's a question, so let me pause for a moment. This, I think, was the relation. So the question is, can you please repeat the questions? I believe this was in relation to letters of recommendation. So the questions are, how does the candidate compare to other well-qualified individuals in a similar role? And the second question is, please give an example of a time you gave the candidate constructive feedback. What was their circumstances and their response? Something along those lines. If you go to GMAC, common letter recommendation, if you Google that, you can get the questions as they appear. And Booth does use those questions for their letters of recommendation that they ask recommenders to respond to. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so let's coming back to now the essays. The first essay is a quintessential goals essay, What is important here is you answer the why. So why Booth, right? Why is Booth the place that you need in order to get to your short and long-term goals? How is Booth going to help you get there? So why and how are really important in answering this question. You need to be able to go in substantial details in terms of why and the how. Typically, you want to have conversations with students who will have firsthand accounts of what it feels like to be a student there, what opportunities they took advantage of, and how they leverage those opportunities to get to their career goals. You then need to capture that in terms of your career goals. This entire essay is focused on goals, and everything you say is related to goals. So sometimes one of the mistakes I see applicants make is saying, oh, well, I choose Booth because I want to be part of this, golf club. Actually, I don't remember if they have a club like that, but let's just say I want to join the golf club. Well, that's great, but this is not the place to do that. This is a goals essay, unless you want to be in entertainment industry, then you can say that, but this is not where you include activities that are focused more on social connections. This is where you focus primarily on professional activities that help you develop skills, help you develop connections in terms of the networks you want to be a part of, and help you make sure that you're able to succeed in the interviews and obviously be able to succeed in your career moves that you're planning to make. So that's this essay. The second essay is asking you to share essentially something about yourself beyond your outside of your office. What is important here to remember is that you want to demonstrate how you are outside of the office, meaning outside of the professional you, outside of the person who builds presentations, goes up in meeting rooms and presents their findings. Whatever it is your job that you currently do day in and day out, who are you outside of that? Right? And this is where you will need an actual example to illustrate the character that you hold. And I mentioned earlier what the characteristics they're looking for. You want to make sure that you capture that in your example that you're choosing for here. Although this is not a question that is included in here, I always ask applicants to also dive a little bit deeper and give the admission team a little sense of how you would be as a student, as a community member, right? Not at this point we're no longer we're done with the professional. How are you going to be on a professional side for this one? How are you going to be on the social side of your social side of your MBA journey? So you may want to add a little bit more context in here to capture those details. And then for those of you who have, low GMAT or GRE, you have an option. This one has maximum numbers, right? 300 words to give a little bit more context of information that's not visible or that's not apparent elsewhere in the application or that requires explanation. So here, what you are going to include are things like GMAT, your GPA, GMAT or GRE, your GPA, employment gaps, anything that may have maybe questionable in your application. You don't want the admission team to be guessing. You want them to have all the details that they need in order for them to say yes to you, right? That's the idea here. You want them to say yes to you, so give them everything that they need. And here's an opportunity. In this question is an opportunity for you to actually be able to give a little bit more context. So with that, we are coming back to just final tips. Keep in mind those characteristics Booth looks for that I mentioned earlier. So if you can watch this as a replay on our YouTube channel for sure, and screenshot that slide. Keep that in mind when you are writing and drafting your applications. Don't overcomplicate it. First and foremost, get your story down. But then in the editing and the weaving and the final, tweakings is where you come back to the characteristics that Booth is looking for. Show your why. it's really, really important for Booth that you show your why. So make sure that you give yourself ample time after you've done the crafting to go back to it and read it and make sure that you've answered your whys, right? Remember, everything is about you in your application to any school, including Booth. Even if you share examples about someone else, it always has to be in context of presenting yourself. So keep that in mind as you're drafting. And then your application, even though you have no word count limitations in terms of your essays, the 2 main essays, make sure that it is concise. Make sure that it's clear, meaning don't use complicated language, don't go into too much technicals, because the admission team may not know those details and they may not even care about those details. So, just make sure that it makes sense. Everything that you include in there, it has to be there in order for the whole application to make sense. That's how you are going to evaluate what stays and what goes out. And of course, it is compelling. Like, you want the admission team to be excited about your future. Make sure that you capture those elements of the excitement in your application as well. All right, so if you have any questions, we're already over time, but do write them in the comments. Or if you want to have a conversation with me about your application and what your Booth or other school's application looks like, make sure that you reach out for a consultation. It's 30 minutes, it's free, there's no obligation to sign up, but we will talk about working together as well. Okay, so I see a question before I conclude that I want to make sure I answer. And the question is, for goals, how much detail is too much detail? How to not sound too rigid or too confused with post-MBA career goals. They should be specific enough, but macro as well. So what I mean by that is the admission team wants to have a mental image of where you're going, why you're doing what you're doing, what's the motivation around it. So we do need to have, I'm not reading your application, but I mean, the admission team needs to have a very clear idea of where you're headed, right? What's the end goal that you're trying to pursue? And then they're going to evaluate, essentially, if that's the end goal, the reverse engineering makes sense in terms of their ability to help you get there. You need to have an idea of the kind of role, so the kind of function you're going to have in the career that you choose, and the sector you're going to be in. If it's consulting, you can still be a little bit more specific in terms of what kind of consulting projects you're interested in working in. Are those in tech? Are those in digital transformation? That's strategy consulting? Is it who is the end user that you're really going to want to serve? And it's understandable that initially you're going to be a generalist, but the idea here is that you're going to be able to focus on projects that are specific interest to you. So you want to really make a clear tie, but don't go into too much detail in terms of like saying how this is going to be like how you need these technical skills and how you're going to manage people to like those. That's just like not necessary to go into so much those kinds of detail, but just macro level, but very clear as in terms of your career goals. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining live. Thank you also if you watched this entire thing as a replay. Next week, we have 2 events. The first one is I'm interviewing a Wharton recent grad. So they graduated in May of this year. And they're going to be talking about their pre-MBA journey as well as their time at Wharton. So if you're considering Wharton, definitely join. Or if you're just considering business school, join, because you can get a sense of what it feels like to be in an MBA environment from someone who's actually walked the walk. And then on Thursday next week, I'm going to be talking about Columbia Business School's application. Luckily, they have actually released the questions and the deadlines for the new application cycle. So we'll have definitely more concrete data to discuss in that session. So join me for that one as well. Thank you again, and have a wonderful end of the week and weekend, and I will see you next week.